Hello, welcome back. All right, we're about to start part two on talking about the shift from the High Baroque all the way to um, the Age of Enlightenment. And I want to go back just a little bit for a second because there was maybe a thing or two I didn't get in about talking about Vermeer. Vermeer is such a special artist, and you know his artwork. I think it's very hard for us to see in the eyes of the Baroque because in some ways it's very much an outlier of the Baroque. The the flat surfaces, but the amount of light and air that's in the paintings, which I think to our modern eyes is just gorgeous. Um, but we need to remember that to many uh, of his contemporaries wasn't all that extraordinary or even felt out of fashion or odd and out of place. And that may have been one of the reasons why Vermeer wasn't that successful as a painter compared to his success as a career as an art dealer. And so, but now looking at these paintings and seeing them with kind of a 20th century eye, with their very kind of 20th century, almost Mondrian-like, grid-like organization and composition, and with their very um, kind of camera-like observation of subtlety of tone and of atmosphere and of light, they yeah, they are extraordinary, and we are lucky that we have the ones we do. Anyway, so we talked about Vermeer and Rembrandt, um, two of the most extraordinary artists of all time. And next I wanted to talk about sort of a transition. I'm going to be talking about a number of different places and what's going on in the Baroque as we move towards later in the Baroque. Um, One of the things to think about is like what happened to the tradition of Rubens, and Rubens did have a number of students who studied with him, but probably the most famous was Anthony van Dyck, who was not significantly much younger than Rubens, just a little bit. And Van Dyck kind of probably more than anyone else continued the tradition of Rubens and Rubens' ambition of painting, definitely in terms of the lusciousness of the surface, the kind of combining transparency and kind of semi-opaque paint, embedded within transparent layers, and all the kind of luscious types of color and surface that you can create that way, and also just that free painterly hand. Van Dyck definitely is the inheritor of the Rubens tradition, but Van Dyck's career was also different from Rubens, not as emphasized on these giant size, multi-figure history painting and religious themed paintings, but much more focused on portraiture and court painting. And now many of these are monumental size portraits, but they're still commission-based portrait paintings, um, and but very gorgeous. Another thing also is that Van Dyck spent a lot of the end of his career in England, so kind of spreading the influence of the Baroque further outward. At the same time, I want to talk about what was going on in Italy. The last time we talked about Italy with the Baroque, we were talking about Gentileschi and the influence of Carracci and Caravaggio. But there were things going on in Italy, and probably no one represents that better than this artist, Andrea Pozzo, who didn't make a lot of works of art because he was an artist second and a brother, a monk first. But he was an artist and very much a very influential writer and thinker about art. Um, and one of the things I think is really influential about him is his emphasis on decorative painting, painting as part of architecture, as a way of kind of expanding Baroque architecture. We've already talked about how Baroque architecture in some ways has a similar ambition to what the late Gothic had, of this idea of architecture expanding upward and reaching the heavens or opening up to the heavens, but the Baroque does it in a much more literal kind of way, with painting often that is a literal painting of the heavens. And so in these two ceiling paintings, you can see um, him taking that idea, kind of taking the ideas of Carracci and Guido Reni, and kind of going further with it. Um, and I just want to point out that this dome right here, this is actually a painting. It is a trompe l'oeil painting meant to look like a dome if you look at it at just the right angle. And he wrote a number of treatises on that topic of how to create these kind of trompe l'oeil perspective effects in a space. And that was going to be pretty influential on a later Baroque artist, Tiepolo. And we'll talk about Tiepolo again because Tiepolo in some ways is um, represents more the Rococo, or maybe in a way you might say he is the synthesis of the influence of French Rococo on the Baroque, and how those two things combine to make sort of an international Baroque slash Rococo style. And I love Tiepolo, and I wish we had more time to talk about his painting because he was an amazing painter himself, and yes, a fantastic artist. But at the same time, I want to talk about another major important event as we're going towards the end, or you know, looking towards the end of the Baroque, and that is the development of these kind of separate schools of painting, and most notably here I'm talking about the French kind of Academy of Painting, and and we're going to talk about Poussin, who is an interesting artist to talk about because um, he's probably not nearly as gifted or as important an artist as many of the people who he was contemporaries with. He was contemporary of Rubens and lived at the same time. He lived for quite a long while. Lived at the same time um, as Velasquez and as Rembrandt and Vermeer. He probably had no idea about who Rembrandt or Vermeer were. Um, and now looking back, we would, admire all of those artists way more than Poussin. But it's easy to not notice that Poussin had such an incredible importance, because he did. And and one of the things I think that is important about his career is that he really tried very hard, kind of like Gentileschi did, but tried very hard to think about the balancing of the different values in painting and trying to kind of find a synthesis between what he admired in Titian and what he admired in Carracci and Caravaggio. But I also think, well, and we'll talk, let's look at the next slide. That might help. And he kind of set the tone for the major kind of division within French painting. In the beginning of his career, he was influenced, and he was very interested in these kind of very pastoral sort of scenes, influenced from like some of the mid-career Titian paintings that we looked at. And these are, allegorical, mythological paintings, um, but they're, kind of in landscape spaces, and they're painted quite relatively freely, quite freely for him. They're painted freely, and they are painted with these kind of more luminous and more transparent colors. But as he moved towards the end of his career, he became much more interested in these more solemn and more serious subject matters, and more solemn and more structurally organized paintings. They were much more unified by kind of a consistent overall warm lighting, but also very carefully organized in terms of decisions about repetition of local color. That different, like that color and that color being purposeful echoes, as if they were wearing cloths of the almost exact same hue, as a purposeful way of kind of slowing down and organizing the composition. And so that's maybe more the later career of Poussin. And so within this conflict within Poussin, or this divide, we kind of see the setting of the conflict that will later turn up in French painting. This conflict between the desire for classicism, for organization, for structure, for solemnity versus a desire for virtuosity, gesture, luminous color, um, transparency. And in Poussin's work, it's pretty clear that the classical or neoclassical tendency is the thing that won out for him and was the thing that he, as a kind of founder of the French academic tradition, really he emphasized. And it seemed like the thing that defined French painting for a long time. But that other side of him also was in there. So, and that leads us to the Rococo,